the most important things to realize is that we're all very different from each other.
Autism is a true continuous trait. I mean, if you look at the genetics, it's little tiny code variations inside of genes, and it varies all the way from all the geniuses in Silicon Valley to an individual that's going to remain nonverbal with lots of other problems, possibly epilepsy on top of the autism.
The popularity of autism as a diagnosis has been affected by this movement that is sometimes called the Neurodiversity Movement, which I think is a really valuable social movement. That social movement says that we should not always evaluate people according to some imagined norm, but we should look at people who have a range of different strengths that might have been overlooked.
The Neurodiversity Movement captured world attention in 1993 at the annual meeting of Autism Network International, ANI, when its founder, Jim Sinclair, gave a powerful speech to parents titled, "Don't Mourn for Us." Sinclair's approach was in direct conflict with the goals of Autism Speaks, the national organization which has raised millions to find the causes and cures of autism, and which speaks primarily not to those on the spectrum, but to their neurotypical families.
This notion of wanting to cure autism has sparked an incredible amount of controversy. There are individuals who are on the spectrum who love their lives and find it actually insulting that we would want to change them. But there are some kids who are just hurting. They're in pain, they're struggling, they haven't developed language. It's hard for them to get through a day. If you ask their parents, if you could cure autism, would you? The majority of them would say yes. And it's not taking away from that child's essence. It's basically saying, I want my child to live an amazing life just like any other child out there without autism.
The Neurodiversity Movement is also highly critical of ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. For instead of cultivating the unique strengths of individuals on the spectrum, ABA focuses on managing autistic behaviors that neurotypicals don't want to see.
Your instinct is your child's crying, oh, hurry up, just pick them up and hug them and love them. They want this attention and they're not getting enough love, so you need to give them that. And that's not the case.
What's that? Buddy Richard.
Let's try better. More. Good. Good job.
It helps build behavior because we're reinforcing the appropriate behavior and ignoring the behavior that we don't want to see.
More, please.
Though ABA is still praised for its scientific rigor and for having more empirical evidence than other approaches, many activists find its history problematic. For back in the 60s, when clinical psychologist Ivar Lovaas pioneered the use of ABA with autistic children at UCLA, he didn't just ignore unacceptable behavior, but actually used electric shock as negative reinforcement. And in the 1970s, he and his UCLA colleague, George Reckers, used a similar ABA conversion therapy to prevent boys as young as 5 from becoming homosexual. Given that science is the model of empirical rigor for ABA and the source of those studies seeking causes financed by Autism Speaks, the neurodiversity movement has been ambivalent toward science. Yet those scientific studies found the issue of causation much more complicated than anticipated, and this proliferation of causal factors may help explain why there is so much neurodiversity on the spectrum. Most important, the movement's concept of neurological pluralism is compatible with new developments in contemporary neuroscience, which no longer assumes there is a hardwired brain, but rather a competition among various neurological circuits. This idea was pioneered by Nobel Prize winner Gerald M. Edelman in Neural Darwinism, 1987, an idea shared by many of his colleagues.
We can't underestimate the way in which the rise of the neurodiversity movement has been influenced by changes in American science and technology. It used to be that the nerd, the geek, or the socially awkward but very intelligent person was not successful. But what has happened is that our society has changed so that we're now valuing, in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, we're now valuing the same set of symptoms that we used to see as impairment.
These ideas from neuroscience are compatible with Jim Sinclair's arguments regarding who should be included in the neurodiversity movement.
Let me lead ya. I know. Let me help.
Sinclair realized that many on the spectrum who couldn't speak without assistance still had other kinds of intelligence, some of the kinds described by Howard Gardner in his 1983 bestseller, Frames of Mind. 2 female voices on the spectrum provided us with a unique access to autistic subjectivity. One was Amanda Baggs, a radical activist who forced us to confront the arrogance of our own neurotypical assumptions about language.
The previous part of this video was in my native language, but my language is not about designing words or even visual symbols for people to interpret. It is about being in a constant conversation with every aspect of my environment. However, the thinking of people like me is only taken seriously if we learn your language. In the end, I want you to know that this has not been intended as a voyeuristic freak show where you get to look at the bizarre workings of the autistic mind. It is meant as a strong statement on the existence and value of many different kinds of thinking and interaction.
The other voice belonged to the more familiar Temple Grandin, who described how her mind works with great clarity and precision. Not only was she featured as one of the 7 autistic case studies in Oliver Sacks's 1995 bestseller, An Anthropologist on Mars, a title he borrowed from Grandin, but she is singled out as, quote, one of the most remarkable autistic people of all. One who holds a PhD in animal science, teaches at Colorado State University, and runs her own business.
But the thing that's important is that for everybody on the spectrum, they tend to be detail-oriented. They also tend to be a bottom-up thinker. You take all the bits and pieces and you put the bits and pieces together that form new wholes. You know, when I was a little kid, all I wanted to do was draw pictures of horses all the time. Well, I was encouraged to draw pictures of other things. Well, you can draw the stable. You can draw a place you might go riding to, an associative link. But one concern I'm getting today, kids on the high end of the spectrum, instead of having something like horses be their fixation, or maybe dinosaurs or airplanes or something else, their fixation is autism. And I don't think that's a good thing. Autism is a very important part of who I am, and I would not want to change, because I like the logical way that I think. But my fixations were things like cattle chutes, optical illusion rooms. These are things that can turn out being the basis for a career.
Grandin's fame is partly based on her mainstream media representation in HBO's 2010 biopic, Temple Grandin, starring Claire Danes, a film made for television that swept the Emmys and replaced Rain Man, 1988, as the most realistic mainstream representation of autism thus far.
There you go, Ray.
Yeah.
You're dancing. This is it.
Yeah, dancing.
In Rain Man, spectators are positioned to identify with Raymond's neurotypical brother, played by Tom Cruise. But Temple Grandin's biopic is the first feature that leads us spectators to identify with an autistic protagonist.
My name is Temple Grandin. I'm not like other people. I think in pictures, and I connect them.
Her biopic uses the cinematic medium to show us how a person on the spectrum actually perceives the world, how she thinks in concrete images rather than words.
I've just been telling Billy here all about our summer visitor.
Are you a cowboy?
Excuse my niece. That's not how we greet people, Temple. You know better than that.
Her aunt's neurotypical manners may censor what Temple says, but they don't affect how she sees. Temple's biopic led us to ask, what is the impact of popular culture on the neurodiversity debate?
We thought Bobby was going to a school for the gifted.
Bobby is gifted. You should see what he can do.
Like every group, those on the spectrum look for characters in popular media with whom they can identify. Characters who expand the range of autistic identity.
In this particular case, your lack of femininity works to our advantage.
The cultural debate on neurodiversity helped pave the way for retro-diagnoses, diagnosing geniuses from the past. This process was particularly resonant in the recent depiction of mathematician Alan Turing. In the Oscar-nominated feature, The Imitation Game, Turing is presented not only as a war hero whose crucial contributions were never fully acknowledged, but also as a homosexual who was exposed to conversion therapy and punished with chemical castration. Though his autism is never explicit, the film implies that both sexual orientation and autism are matters of civil rights. These retro-diagnoses have also been performed on fictional characters, particularly on Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle's famous detective. Although in past decades, Holmes' dramatic mood swings led him to be described as manic-depressive, contemporary readers now identify him with Asperger's syndrome, a diagnosis endorsed by several doctors in the medical community and by other works in popular culture, such as Mark Haddon's marvelous novel, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, 2003, which is told in first person by a 15-year-old would-be detective with high-functioning autism, whose primary model is Holmes.
Well, there isn't any time to waste then.
Wisdom.
While the popular movie franchise turns Robert Downey's Sherlock and Jude Law's Watson into period action heroes, the two television series update the story, partly by strengthening Sherlock's identification with those on the spectrum. In the 2010 British series called Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch's hyperactive Holmes is paired with Martin Freeman's weary war veteran Watson.
Sherlock Holmes.
Joan Watson.
Also set in the present, the 2012 American series Elementary shifts the setting to New York, where Johnny Lee Miller's Sherlock is a recovering British drug addict aided by an Asian American female Dr. Watson, played by Lucy Liu. The casting of Cumberbatch in the Sherlock revival proved significant to many autistic fans, for he was seen as, quote, specializing in characters who exist somewhere on the autism spectrum. But when a journalist recently asked him about this, Cumberbatch told him, quote, to cut out that nonsense, despite the fact that he had earlier taken pride in this association, not only in playing Sherlock Holmes and Alan Turing, but also physicist Stephen Hawking, whistleblower Julian Assange, and Dr. Frankenstein and his monster. Some of his former fans felt betrayed, like this blogger who writes under the name The Caffeinated Autistic. A good place to start is by listening to the voice of Temple Grandin, whose unique contribution is most brilliantly described by neurologist Oliver Sacks. His tribute to her first book shows how it laid the groundwork for the autistic autobiography as a new genre, and for neurodiversity as a compelling political movement.